things like that. Oh, I like to get out of bed in the morning. It's awesome to see God do these kind of things. So good. I'm going to pull myself together here. I love you guys. Proud of you. Thank you. If you looked at some of the things in the world that we can't explain how they happen, like impossible things, where somebody says, there's no way anybody could ever do this, and yet it happened. Somebody, somehow, we still don't know, built the pyramids in Egypt. Tens of thousands of stones and bricks put together. Like, no one knows how that happened. How did they do it? We do know some things. The Royal Gorge Dam, amazing thing built back during the Depression to provide hydroelectric power. We can look at the San Francisco Bridge, the great Golden Gate Bridge out there. First suspension bridge across a body of water like that. How could they do that? The first person to run a 4-minute mile. How did they do that? First person to climb Mount Rushmore. How did they do that? Some of these, not Mount Rushmore, just kidding. Mount Everest. Mount Rushmore is probably not something you want to climb, bad. The Panama Canal. Years, millions and lives done to connect an ocean across 2 different places. And then the moon landing. How did they do that? And then you think, maybe they didn't. There's some great, if you want to entertain yourself for a few hours, go Google conspiracy theories about the moon landing. You'll have lots of entertainment. There's all kinds of great, hilarious things out there that people think. But there's stuff like that. Impossible things that can't be done until they are. What we're going to see today as we go into Nehemiah chapter 2 is we're going to watch him in that same situation. He's going to be in a place where last week, we saw he has this burning desire from God, this to go do something that's never been done, something that probably can't be done, because Nehemiah was born as a slave in Babylon. His country had been conquered over 100 years before. His family was brought as prisoners of war there. He was raised there. He's never even seen Jerusalem, never been back to Israel. But God gave him a broken heart about something. He says, I want to go back and rebuild the wall and rebuild the city where God's glory dwells. This has to happen. But he can't go because he's a slave. How is he going to do that? This is his burden. There's an impossible task before him that cannot get done unless it can. And today we're going to watch how God works to make all that happen for Nehemiah. As we began last week, we saw him do some amazing things. But the only thing worse than having an impossible dream is having no way to get there. No way to make it happen. Is God going to be able to do that? So as we see the first slide this morning, this is the situation we finished with last week. He's been praying for 4 months, if you remember. He wept, he cried, he fasted. He asked other people to pray with him for 4 months. He's been praying, waiting for just the right moment to finally ask permission of just, let's say, the most dangerous man on the planet, the king that he works for. He says, God, give me today success. Make your servant successful as I go and make this request before this man who happens to be the king that I work for. We told you last week Nehemiah was the cupbearer. That meant he's the one who had to taste all the king's food before he ate it. How would you like that job? Not such a bad job until you realize there's people that sometimes try to poison the king. So I'd be happy to taste people's food before they eat it. I'd love a job like that, but not if I knew there might be poison. And that's what Nehemiah's job was. He was the last stop between somebody who wanted to take the king out by poisoning his food or not. So Nehemiah had to drink a little bit and take a little bit of all the food on the king's plate every meal and wait about 5 minutes. And if he didn't fall on the ground, thrashing in pain with foam coming out of his mouth, the king knew it's okay for me to eat my meal. How'd you like that job? The only person who gets that job is somebody of incredible trust and integrity, because you're truly risking your life if you're the king. This man is the last stop between you and death. That's Nehemiah's job. If you're the king, would you want to let Nehemiah go? I wouldn't. He's kept me alive so far. I like him right where he is. I don't want to let him go away. But Nehemiah's going to come ask the king for some big stuff today. We're going to watch this unfold in the perfect plan of God. So here we are. He's got a great life. Remember that too? He's living with the king in the castle. He has all the stuff he could ever want. He's got a perfect life. It's what everybody would want. Leisure, wealth, it's all his. Would you be willing to walk away from all of that to take an 800-mile journey through difficult country, through political issues, getting to a place where you're going to have to rebuild and do this incredible engineering feat to rebuild a wall as quickly as possible while enemies are attacking you with all kinds of division, dishonesty, corruption happening all around you? That's what he's going to be doing. For 13 years of his life, he's going to be working to reform and revive these people of God in this city and build the city. It's going to be a task that's really, really hard. If he knows how hard it would be, he may have never wanted to do it. But right now, he has a passion from God to go rebuild the city wall. So here we are. We're going to take from now through Easter to go through this book together. Nehemiah, we saw last week, has 2 qualities that are absolutely necessary for any great leader to have. If you want to be someone who makes a significant mark on the world, you have to have these 2 qualities together. A deep personal humility, that whatever you do, it's not about you, coupled with a drivenness to do a great work with your life. Those two things have to be together. You have to have a deep humility coupled with a desire and a drive to do something great. Now, as Christians, we would fine-tune that a little bit more and say we want to be humble because we have been saved by grace through faith, that our Savior has taken us from sinners to saints, so we're humble. And we want to do a great work that God tells us to do. Not just something we want to do, but something God tells us and gives us a burden for. That's our variation of that. Great humility, because I'm saved, and a great work for God that he leads me to do. This is us. So as we finished up last week, we had a prayer challenge for you after we looked at chapter 1, and it goes like this. We said, God, would you do it again? Because we don't believe that God only works in the Old Testament, doing the healings and miracles and things he did there, working through all kinds of people. We don't believe he only worked in the New Testament early church with the book of Acts and the things that he did there. We believe he still works today. You just heard evidence of that. 7 people made a decision to trust Jesus. We also had a little baptism class yesterday where 10 of our elementary kids got to hear what baptism means because they're curious and they're wondering about their faith. And so we may see some of them as well becoming Christians, getting baptized soon. Exciting stuff is happening. We believe God's still doing that today. We are. That's why we get out of bed, because we're Christians, we see it. So we basically said, God, would you do that again? Here, now, in our place, in our church, in our community, would you keep doing the things you're doing? Would you keep making these amazing things happen? And the way it works is we get to keep being humble servants while God calls us to do a great work. And then we said, God, what might that be for me as an individual? What might that be for us as a church? And I asked you to pray about that. And I want you to keep praying about that until you get some kind of an answer. Nehemiah prayed for 4 months. You can at least do that. Maybe you'll get your answer quicker, maybe same time, maybe later, but keep praying until you get it. So let's jump in today. Outstanding people have one thing in common. They have an absolute sense of mission. I know who God is, I know who I am, and I know what I'm supposed to be doing with myself. Nehemiah gets that. He's been praying to this great and powerful God. He knows who God is. He knows he's God's servant, and he knows what God wants him to go do. For any of us, as you pray about these things and think about what might God want me to do with my life, that's something you have to chew on. Think about, what is it? I know who God is. I know who I am. Now, what does God want me to do? If you want to have a great life, you're going to have to figure out, what is this thing I'm supposed to do? What is the great work God wants me to do in my life? That's our question. So when you pray about something like that, prayer is something Nehemiah did for 4 months. But if you have a great burden to do something significant with your life, it's not just praying and hoping it happens. It's prayer and planning. You pray for it to happen, for God to show you and make the way, but then you have to be ready with some grunt work of your own, some detail work where you thought about things and made things get ready to happen. Your heart gets broken by what breaks the heart of God? Great. You're going to need 3 more things after that. God, give me some clarity. Now that I know what I'm supposed to care about, give me some clarity to know exactly what I should do, because there's lots of ways to attack a problem. I need partners to come alongside me, and I'm going to need some provision and some resources to make this happen. We're going to think about this one more time at the end of our message today, but this is what Nehemiah is going to be thinking about while he's praying for these 4 months, over and over again, praying and praying. He finally gets to the place where he's ready to come talk to the king about it. Here we go, Nehemiah chapter 2. So he has this day of great courage. He's going to come talk to the king. In front of Nehemiah are 2 things. Either death is going to happen today, or destiny is going to happen today. That's it. Because you don't get to come in the presence of a king with sadness. It tells us it came about 4 months after Nehemiah started praying that wine was brought before the king, meaning Nehemiah brought the wine to the king. And I took the wine and gave it to him, he says, but I had not been sad in his presence. Because you didn't do that. You're not supposed to show sadness in the presence of royalty. If you did, they could have you excommunicated. Those of you that studied the book of Esther with us a few years ago saw that too. Esther had the same issue. She had to go ask the king for something, and she was scared for her life. You don't get to do that. And remember, Nehemiah is just a servant. He's been born in captivity there. He's nobody except that he works for the king. But you're not supposed to show sadness in the face of the king. If you do, it could be bad. So I had not been sad in his presence, he tells us. That's an interesting way to look at that. Never been sad in front of him before. And so as he does this, we've got this, hold on a second, I lost my place here. The king doesn't want him to leave either. You can back that one up a little bit. I'm not ready for that. The king doesn't want him to leave. Think about that. Why would you let him go? I don't want you to go, Nehemiah. I need you to stay with me. So Nehemiah is going to be asking for something the king naturally doesn't want to give him permission for. But it's not just that he wants to leave. It's that he wants to leave for a long time and go away and not come back for maybe a couple years. It's going to be a significant ask that he's going to do with that. It's going to take a supernatural response from God to make it happen. When I was growing up in my high school years, my dad and some of his friends, some of you guys may recognize this, they kind of had a little bit of a fun midlife crisis. They all had normal jobs, but they grew up as cowboys. They grew up watching Westerns, and they wanted to have their own cattle business. And so they leased some land on the southeast side of town, right where the San Antonio River leaves 1604, 281, way down there. And they got this big place they leased, and they put a bunch of their cattle on it. So after their real jobs, they'd go by and check on the cattle every day. It was kind of like a boyhood dream come true for these guys. 3-bar cattle. The thing I thought was cool about the place is I got voluntold by my dad to go help him on the weekends, is they had an irrigation canal there. So this big place, several hundreds of acres, had a concrete canal that went all the way through the middle, and there was an orchard for pecan trees on both sides of the canal, on the right and the left. And the way this worked was they would let the canal fill up with water, and it had what's called a sluice gate. If you've heard of that before, it looks like a little guillotine, and it would close down, and the canal would fill up with water. And then on the sides of the canal, they had smaller sluice gates that they would then open up, and the water would flood out into the orchard to water the trees. Brilliant technology. They've done it since ancient times. But what is going to happen here is something similar to that. There's a verse in Proverbs that tells us what God's going to be doing behind the scenes that we don't see in the book of Nehemiah, except God does it. It tells us in Proverbs that the king's heart is like a channel of water in the hand of the Lord, and God will make it go wherever he pleases. Just as these guys could open a sluice gate and let the water flow left or right to water the trees, he says God works throughout history in military leaders, political leaders, it doesn't matter. He will take somebody who thinks they're all-powerful, and he will make them do something they didn't think they would do. We're going to watch that today. God's going to have this king who has no vested interest, no reason to let Nehemiah go. Let him go. And he's going to bless him beyond what he even asked for. But it only happens because God is a sovereign God. Remember who Nehemiah prayed to last week? As he started to pray, he prayed to this awesome God in heaven, this powerful God in heaven. I'm praying to the God who controls everything, even changes people's minds when there's no reason for them to want to change their minds. This is what's going on behind the scenes, is God is working in this king's heart to change him. Love that. Got to have it. So the king's going to ask a question now. Now we're getting dangerous. Remember, you're not supposed to be sad in the king's presence. And he says, why is your face sad? You don't look sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart. Which means, what's wrong with you? And he says, my response to that was, I was very much afraid. Again, you're not supposed to show any kind of emotion except happiness in front of the king. He is between death and destiny. What happens next comes out of his mouth and the king's mouth will decide whether he is executed or whether he might just get what he wants or whether he stays right where he is. This is a time where he's really, really scared about this, very much afraid. There's a reason. Proverbs tells us if the king gets upset, you make the king angry, he can put you to death. So it's really wise to keep the king happy. You know that. In ancient times, the kings were all powerful. There's nothing you can do to stop that. So you can't show sadness in front of the king. That's not going to happen. And here comes Nehemiah. So he says, I'm going to start talking right now. I said to the king, let the king live forever. That was a popular way of addressing royalty. And then he says this. This is where his courage and boldness start to show. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, is desolate and its gates have been burned with fire? He does not say the word Jerusalem. If you were here with me last week, you remember that. There was a group of people that had already started rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, and some local politicians didn't like it because it took away their power. So they sent some fake news, like a letter to the king, and said, hey, king, if these guys rebuild the walls to the city of Jerusalem, they're going to stop paying taxes. They're going to start embarrassing you. They're going to rebel against you. You sure don't want that, do you, Mr. King? And so he's like, oh, I don't want that. So he writes a letter back and says, tell them to stop building the walls. Well, they didn't just stop building the walls. They tore down the things that they had built. So the whole place is in rubble. And that's why Nehemiah's heart was broken last week as we met him. But as he talks, he doesn't mention the word Jerusalem ever. He'll never say that word because he doesn't want the king to remember that part. Nehemiah's pretty crafty. He's going to say, do you realize how embarrassing it is that the place of my father's ancestors is in ruins? He does that because he knows that the Persians and the Babylonians have a high value for their ancestors. They value those who have come before them. And the image of a cemetery where the headstones have been kicked over and vandalized is shocking. The king would be, that's horrible. I can't believe that happened, Nehemiah. That's terrible that happened to your family. And he says the gates are consumed, and he's describing desolation, but he never says anything about building a wall or about the city of Jerusalem. He's just going to tell him just enough to appeal to the king's values, that they take care of their ancestors, and maybe his emotions, to say, that's really sad, Nehemiah. I can see why you're sad now. I understand. That's the first part. Then he goes on after that and says this. The king says to me, what would you request? Now, when you see this is an all-powerful king asking one of his servants who was born in captivity, what would you like me to do for you? That never happens in the real world. Never happens. But it happens here because the king's heart is like channels of water that flow wherever God says. We get to see this. What is your request? This is great. You get the idea that this whole interview shows you something about Nehemiah, that it's because of his integrity. It's because of who he has been for the king all these years that the king is willing to ask him this question. There's no reason for royalty to ask a servant anything. But in this case, Nehemiah went from being someone who was born as the son of people that were prisoners of war. Somehow, through his work effort, through his honesty, through his integrity, and all those things, he becomes someone who gets elevated to the place of being the cupbearer of the king, the most trusted man in the kingdom that the king leans on for advice. This man controls access to the king. He has the king's signet ring to sign papers with. He's extremely valuable to the king. And that's why the king is willing to do this for him, to say, you've earned the right to ask me this question. So for us, think about this. If you're going to ask people to come along with you and join you in some kind of a great work that you think you're supposed to do for God, the most valuable persuasion tool you have is your own personal integrity. If you ask somebody to do something, they better know that you are someone who's proven yourself time and again to be someone they can trust and want to partner with. You may have the experience of asking somebody to come water your plants for you while you're out of town on vacation, and you get back and they're all dead. Probably not going to hire that person again. You ask them to take care of your pets. You come back and they're all 5 pounds lighter because they forgot to show up and feed your pets. Probably not going to hire that person again. That's awful. You ask them to mow your yard. They mow the front yard but not the back. Not going to have them come back again. You have to earn the right to be respected, that you do things right every time consistently, but people learn to trust you, that you have integrity. Nehemiah has that, and we have to have it too. If we're going to do a great work for God, we don't get to play crazy hypocrites. The world's already got enough reasons not to trust Christianity. We have to give them lots of reasons to believe that it's true and that we're really the people of God doing the work of God. Here's another thing I want you to see. You're going to want to involve people who have the potential to help you. They've got the potential and the power to help change whatever the situation might be that you need to get done. Let them know what your burden is. What is it that God's put in your heart? And say, would you be interested in helping me with this? That's one of the things we encourage you to do at the church. If you have something you really care about, talk to us, talk to some other people, and let's see if we can get a team together to start tackling that problem, start serving that issue, whatever it might be. We want you to do that together. Back to our story. So the king says, what would you request? And he says, so I prayed to the God of heaven. Now, this is what I call a flare prayer, where you just shoot up a prayer real quick in the moment. This is not how you want to live your life as a Christian, where you just go through life on your own, and then when something bad happens, you say, oh, God, help me at the last second and throw up a flare prayer. That's not what we're supposed to do. Nehemiah's prayed for 4 months. He's fasted. He's wept. His heart's all in this. And then at the very moment when the king of the whole country says, what would you like to do? What's your request? He prays one more time. We don't know what he says. It could be, thank you, God. It could be, give me the words. God, don't let him kill me. We don't know what he says, but he prays one last time quickly, and he's going to start talking. What would you request? So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said to the king, if it should please the king, that's a nice formula to use. If your servant has found favor before you, which he apparently has, I want you to send me to Judah, not Jerusalem. He never says the name of the city. Send me to Judah, which is the geographical region, so that I may rebuild it. Now, I want to talk a little bit about words here. I was raised here in the South, in Texas, and we have some things called manners here. How many of you were raised by parents that made you use your manners when you did things? Okay, quite a few of you. So we're not weird. This is normal for us down here. And some of those were yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, please, and thank you. Those are like the holy trinity of 6 words we got to have to live down here. And if you look at the etymology where they come from, it's kind of fun. For the women, ma'am, it's a contraction of madam. It actually comes from the French word madame. If you think of the college called Notre Dame, that means Our Lady, talking about the Virgin Mary. And so madame was a French word, 2 words, and it got shortened to madam, M-A-D-A-M, and then it got shortened with a D dropping out with a contraction to ma'am, M-A-A-M. And if you say it with a southern accent, it sounds even better. Ma'am, yes ma'am, do that. But it means it's an honorable title for a woman. It means I respect you, I'm speaking well to you. We did that. I was raised very strictly with that in my home. Read a fun article this week from a lady written up north who does not like the word ma'am. She feels like if you call me a ma'am, you're calling me an old woman. That's what you say to old ladies, not to young ladies. Says, no, down in the South, we even talk to our little children that way. Yes, ma'am, no, sir. We talk to our children with those same kind of words because we're trying to show respect to them just as they show respect to us. It's interesting how the culture changes. With men, we get yes, sir, no, sir. That comes from sire, S-I-R-E, which is a Latin word talking again about a revered or an esteemed man in the community. So your sire was your sir, again, used to describe a man you want to show respect to. So if you say yes, ma'am, or yes, sir, you're showing deference and honor to someone. When the word please is interesting, it's gotten a little bit warped in the way we use it. When we say please, we often do it in a way of trying to get something. Mom, can I have some ice cream after dinner? You have to say, please, right? We teach them that. And what we're really teaching is you have to say the magic word. That's not what it's about. It's not about a magic word. It's not just saying please means I get everything I want. The idea of please is if it pleases you, mom or dad, or if it pleases the king, or as Nehemiah prayed, if it pleases you, God, it's the idea to say, would it please you to let me have this? And I go to all this effort to tell you this because this shows the humility of Nehemiah that we talked about last week. This man is incredibly humble. He's going to say, if it pleases you, king, will you let me do this? It's not about what I'm going to get out of it. It's will you be pleased by letting me go? That's what we want to teach. Now, if you're smart and you're a young person, you do want ice cream for dessert, you want to say it this way. Would it please you, mom or dad, to let me have some ice cream after dinner? And I'll be happy to scoop out some for you too. Now, that might work, okay? Try that. So it's the please idea. And I want you to see that I'm not making this up. Go back with me and look at these verses in chapter 1. Here's 4 examples of Nehemiah saying this. Please, Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God. As he starts his prayer, these are the first words out of his mouth. The very first word is, please. God, if it pleases you, if I'm doing what you want me to do, if this is really the burden you put on my heart, show me that this is right. Does this please you, God? Next, he's going to pray, remember the word which you commanded your servant. God, please, remember who you are, who you've been faithful to be in the Old Testament. Keep being that person. Please, Lord, may your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant today as I go to talk to this man. And finally, please make your servant successful and give me mercy when I talk to the king. 4 times, Nehemiah says, God, please, does this please you? Am I doing the right thing? Is this your will? And then he talks to the king 2 more times and says, please, please. On the next picture, if it pleases the king, if your servant has found favor with you. We just saw that verse. And then later on in the story, he's going to say, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to me. I want you to notice a little story inside a story. We want to ask God, is this really what you want me to do? Am I clear about this vision? Is this what you're showing me? Please, God, if this is you, if it pleases you, let's do it. I'll do what you tell me. But always talk to God first and talk to him twice as much before you start talking to the person to try to help you. He doesn't start with the king. He starts with God and asks him 4 times. And then he talks to the king and asks him twice. There's probably something there for us to think about. Always go to God and ask, is this your will? Get that part straight. Back to the story. The king says to me, hey, Nehemiah, how long are you going to be gone? When are you going to come back? He didn't say yes yet, but he's now asking questions. First he says, what do you want? I want to go back and rebuild Judah. Then he says, how long is it going to take and when are you going to come back? He's starting to lean in the right direction, but he hasn't said yes yet. It pleased the king to send me. Please, 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 between God and the king, and guess what? It pleased the king to send me. He finally got his yes. He finally got his yes. And I want you to notice this. How long will the journey be and when are you coming back? There are some questions. There are some details the king wants to hear before he says yes. Nehemiah has to tell him, I'm going to be gone this long. He has to know how long it is to get there, how long it's probably going to take to do the wall, and how long it's going to take to get back. By the way, it was an 800-mile journey. So if you think of that in terms of Texas geography, that would be the tip of Brownsville all the way up to the tip of the Panhandle, way up there. It would be all the way across Texas, top to bottom. 800 miles. That's a long way to travel. That's what we're talking about. One way. Do all the work on the wall and then come back again to the king. So he has something in mind. He's had to think about this. He's had time to plan and have details and figure out some things. And one of the things we're going to see here is it's not just him hoping he gets to go and get a yes. He's got to think about all the stuff it's going to take to make the journey happen too and come back. Here's another principle I want you to do. When you have success come around, it's going to come because opportunity meets preparation. This is a famous quote from a man named Zig Ziglar, those of you that know him. There's an opportunity in front of you, but it's not going to be something you can seize if you're not prepared for it. So when the king says, I got one last question, how long is it going to take and when are you coming back? You better have the answer. And because he answers the king finally says yes. So yes, you want to have the opportunity in front of you that you pray for and ask for, but you need to be ready to get into it with the preparation that you put in your work as well. People want to hear the details. Many years ago, I went to the bank with a friend of mine from church because I was trying to get a loan for about $1 million to build a building for a church. And I was getting ready to go, and this wise man that was one of my mentors said, let me go with you. I've done this a few times before. Yes, you want to wear a nice suit and a tie, but you're young. He's like, you're in your 30s. You probably don't have a lot of credibility, and nobody knows who you are. It doesn't matter how polite you are. You can say please all you want, but that bank's not going to give you money. Here's what they want to see. They're going to want to see 3 years of your church's giving. How much money do people give? They want to see how many people are coming. They want to know how much is the land valued for that you're trying to buy. How much is the neighborhood growing where you are? Are there things happening with growth development? he says, you better have answers for all those things before you go sit across the deal, otherwise we're wasting our time. So I had all my research ready to go with my friend Bob. And we sat there at the bank, still remember the bank, still drive by it and frown every once in a while, but they told me no. After all that preparation, they still said no. Great kid, you got your education, you got a big dream, but we don't have enough track record here to trust you with $1 million. Sorry, go somewhere else. We found another place to give us the money. It worked out okay. We got the building done. But if I hadn't done what Bob told me, I would have had no chance at all to even go in the door. Success needs opportunity and preparation to meet. Got to have that. Something else you want to think about is this dependent prayer that he was doing for these 4 months as he prays and prays and prays and says, God, please, 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 please. You got to couple that with this planning, this deliberate planning. I've got everything thought through. I know what's going to come. I know what's going to take, how long it's going to be, what it's going to cost. He's thought through all the details while he has prayed. So pray for your vision that God gives you, but also pray for the details to back it up when it comes true. Got to have all that. I'm more that visionary kind of person, the way God wired me. I hate details. I really do. God gave me a wife who loves details. And so we're a great match to drive each other crazy, but that's how it works. And you have to have that too. You got to have somebody who might dream the dream, but somebody's got to say, here's all the stuff that's going to take to make it happen. Here at the church, our staff does that for me, and they're wonderful, keeping me straight. Nehemiah's going to have 3 things he's going to ask for. He's going to ask for political permission to go because he's leaving the main city and going far away, 800 miles. He's going to need provisions to have things to use when he gets there, some building supplies, and also provisions for the journey. It's going to take a few months to get there for 800 miles. It's a long way to go by horseback. And you got all these people traveling with you. And the king's going to give him military protection too that he doesn't even ask for. But the king knows he needs more than he's even asking for. And so he's got some things he's coming to him. Here it comes to the next verse. I said to the king, if it pleases the king, this is his first ask. And I want you to notice he keeps going here. He says, hey, king, while you're in the mood to say yes, like you told me I can go on the trip now, I need a few extra things. Can you keep saying yes? Could you send me with some letters to be given to the governors of the various provinces as I travel through? Because we all know how it works in politics. The further away you are from the king's castle, the less they really care what the king thinks. The guys that are far enough away, they're not so scared of the king. So I'm going to need some official letters, stamped, sealed, signed, that I really have permission to go, because he's going to be changing the official policy of the king. The king had written a letter a few years ago that said, stop building this wall. And now Nehemiah is going to go back and say, the king said, I can start building it again. And the local people are going to think, prove it. We don't believe it. The king doesn't change his mind. You better have documentation. And he does. He asks for letters so they'll allow me to pass through until I come to Judah. There's a second thing he's going to need. He needs the supplies to get there, the provisions. If it pleases the king, I need letters to go to the forest. Asaph is the king's forestry manager. He's a Jewish man as well. And he says, I'm going to need wood, king, for 3 things. Now watch how sneaky Nehemiah is. I'm going to need wood for the gates of the citadel by the temple. Okay, the king can see that. I need some wood to rebuild the city wall. And I need some for the house I'm going to live in. He puts that part in the middle about rebuilding the city. He kind of sneaks it in there. So the king hears, yes, doing this. Second thing, and then I need a place to live, king. You can visualize me building a house to stay in while I'm doing this project. He puts that part that might be a little bit sticky right in the middle, the idea that he's going to rebuild the wall of the city, because that's something the king may not have been too happy about. So he's very wise in how he puts this all together. He says the truth, but he puts it right in the middle where it's easy to forget. Somebody comes to you with 3 requests, always watch the middle one. That's the one they really want. That's the sneaky part here. So the king granted this to me. He's going to give him all the supplies he wants, because why? The good hand of my God was upon me. Nehemiah does not say, I got it, it worked, I'm such a great man of faith, it's all about how I prayed and the people that prayed with me, I deserve all the credit. No, remember, Nehemiah is deeply humble, and he says, this is the God who did it for me. The hand of my God was upon me. It's a phrase used in the Old Testament by many leaders that say, God made this happen. The king's hand is controlled like channels of water by God. That's what he realizes. God did this. He gave me the burden to pray for the right thing. He gave me the passion to do this. He gave me the right words to say to the king. He has opened the doors. He's provided the provision. God did this. He gives God all the glory, which we have to do as well. A couple more things here. He's got 3 things he asked for. You're going to do this with people too. If you feel like God's given you a burden to do some great work, there's something that needs to happen that you need to be a part of. You want to share that vision with people. You want to also share the logistics of it. What's it going to be like, the plans, and ask for what you need. Hey, if you're going to come with me, here's what it's going to cost. We've got to think about all this together. So as you might have a plan to do something for God that he's put a burden in your heart to do, this is all necessary. Get this vision, get the plans, get the logistics, get the resources ready to make it all happen. You've got to do that together. Wrapping up near the end of the story now. So I came to the governors of the provinces beyond the river, and I gave them the king's letters. We're getting to see him on the journey now. He's getting nowhere. And then it tells us that the king gave him something extra. He asked for the political papers. He asked for the supplies. But the king also sent him with officers of the army and horsemen. He has a protective detail go with him, not just army soldiers, but officers. So if there's anybody along the journey that wants to question his credibility, that wants to question his paperwork, there's a military officer that says, I work for the king, and this is legitimate, this is real. Please open the gates and get out of the way, or the whole army is going to be here tomorrow because I represent the king. So he has this wide open pathway to go because the king realized, I'm not just going to say yes to this and this, I'm going to give him this too. Isn't that how God works? You ask for something, and he works, and then guess what? He gives you what we call grace upon grace. He gives you more than you ask for. And the king, it doesn't tell us the story, but he obviously provisioned this entire journey because Nehemiah is a slave. He has no money. The king pays for Nehemiah to go, for all the people that went with him. He pays for all their food and everything along the way. Grace upon grace. The king does way more than he even asked for. Next verse. Here's the end of the story today. Every story has to have a villain, has to have a bad guy, right? Nehemiah has a couple of people that are going to fight him for 13 years over everything he's trying to do. There's going to be a sinister and sustained attack on everything Nehemiah does while he's on this journey. And it's coming from the same two guys that wrote the fake news to the king before and said, hey, king, if you let these people rebuild the wall, they're not going to pay taxes. They're going to rebel against you. How embarrassing that's going to be, king. And made him, trick him into signing the paper to stop the wall. These two guys, Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite, are guys who were living in the area. They're very politically connected. They're important people. They've married into the Jewish community. They've got tentacles everywhere. And they have power, they have money, and they have influence. And they realize if Nehemiah comes back and rebuilds this wall with the king's authority, we're going to lose our importance. We're not going to be the big shots anymore. And we don't want that to happen. And so they're going to fight him. They're going to accuse him of treachery. They're going to make fun of the wall that a little fox could jump on it and knock it down. They're going to have threats of death. They're going to have attacks constantly, trying to trick him to leave in the city that he can get ambushed and killed. These guys play dirty pool the whole way through the book. They're always there. In almost every chapter, you see them against him, against him, against him. They represent, guess who? The one who wants to kill, steal, and destroy everything in your life, which is Satan. So while we're doing a great work for God, don't be a bit surprised when it doesn't go smoothly. When you have obstacles, when you have people that don't agree, that don't like what you're doing, that want to fight you about it. They might do it in the shadows, they might do it out in the open, but they like it the way it is because they're the big shot. They control something that you're trying to change, and if that happens, you got to realize this is spiritual warfare. I'm doing the work of God, and Satan doesn't want it to happen. And so what happened to them can happen to us. You may think of your life and any great thing you've done, you may think of some people that have been against you, and they've fought you from the shadows or fought you out in the open, but they've been against you. It's not a surprise. If Nehemiah knew how hard this was going to be, I'm not sure he would have wanted this. We're going to watch him have to go through great victories and deal with constant opposition over and over again throughout this whole story. Life is not easy. Doing great works is not easy. When they built the Golden Gate Bridge, dozens of people died. When they built the Panama Canal, hundreds or thousands of guys died from mosquito bites and malaria. I don't know how many people died building the pyramids. I'm sure it's quite a few. Great works costs, there's sacrifice, there's risk. And especially if you're doing a great work for God, you're going to see that same thing happen again. And so when these two guys see it, it is very displeasing to them. It says they don't like it that someone has come to do something good for the welfare of Israel. They're going to cross their arms, they're going to shake their heads and say, game on. Let the resistance begin. We're going to do everything we can to stop this man or kill him if we need to. He's not taking away our power, our influence, or our importance. And so this is what's coming. You're going to see it start next week as we get into the next part of the book. Here's our challenge to pray for today as we wrap up. To pray, God, would you break my heart with what breaks yours? What is out there in the world that hurts, that you look at and say, this is wrong, this is unjust, somebody should do something about this, it can't be this way, something has to be done. God gives you that burden. He breaks your heart about that, and you say, I want to be the one to do something about this. And God gives you that passion to do it. Then you want to pray for three things. God, as you're making this burden known to me that breaks my heart, would you give me clarity? Like Nehemiah had, give me partners, and I'm going to need some provisions and resources. So pray for that thing that God's putting on your heart, but you also want to get all the details ready to go and realize there'll be some opposition coming for you as well. I'm going to invite our servers to come up with me.